I took the midnight train from the city to the small town where I lived. I never imagined that it would become a nightmarish ordeal that would scar me for life. The train was nearly empty, just the way I liked it. I boarded carriage 13, took a seat by the window, and closed my eyes, ready to get some rest. Soon after, I heard the shuffling of feet and the opening and closing of the carriage door. 5 more passengers had entered the carriage. I glanced at them, unconcerned, as they took their seats. A sudden lurch of the train jolted me from my thoughts. It seemed like we had picked up speed, and the faint light that filtered through the windows gradually faded to darkness. I looked out, but all I could see was a black void surrounding the train. The darkness had triggered something. The passengers began to share their lives. I learned that Emma's eerie landscapes were inspired by the loss of her younger brother, who had drowned in a lake when she was a child. Coincidentally, Tom, her boyfriend, had been present at the lake that day, but he didn't remember Emma. He was there with another girl, who would later become the mother of his son. That son was now a ward of the state due to Tom's struggle with alcoholism, which was fueled by his guilt over cheating on Emma with Lily. Sarah, the woman who despised Tom for his betrayal of her sister, had her own demons to battle. After her mother's death, she became obsessed with finding the person responsible for the hit and run. She spent years of her life tracking down leads and using her position as a private investigator to gather information. The search consumed her, poisoning her relationships and forcing her to confront the darkest parts of herself. Dave, the man responsible for the accident, was a widower who had lost his wife to cancer. In his grief, he had turned to the bottle, culminating in the drunken night that led to the hit and run. Racked with guilt and afraid of the consequences, he'd kept his secret hidden for years, haunted by the lives he had destroyed. Lastly, there was Jane, a nurse who had been the first responder at the scene of the accident that killed Sarah's mother. She carried the weight of that night with her, blaming herself for not being able to save the woman's life. In a cruel twist of fate, she had also been the nurse who cared for Dave's dying wife, never knowing the connection between them. Our lives were a tangled web of tragedies, loves, and secrets, all leading us to this moment, bound together in carriage 13. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. It was unnerving, this revelation that we were entangled by fate. But as the darkness pressed in, we had to focus on survival, even as our shared past threatened to tear us apart. We realized that if we wanted to survive, we had to stick together. But as the train thundered through the abyss, tensions grew. The darkness fed on our fears and insecurities, amplifying them. It whispered terrible truths, bringing long-buried emotions to the surface. It played on our guilt, our regrets, and the fragile threads of connection that held us together. Soon, we were at each other's throats. Whispers filled the air, voices that sounded eerily like our own, recounting our deepest shames and failures. Emma could hear her brother's voice, calling to her from the depths of the lake where he drowned. Tom was taunted with images of his son, crying for his absent father, while Sarah was tortured with the feeling of her mother's blood on her hands. Jane found herself reliving the moment she couldn't save Sarah's mother, the woman's pleading eyes etched into her memory. Dave was forced to confront the ghost of his wife, who accused him of abandoning her in her time of need and reminded him of the blood on his hands from the hit and run. The atmosphere in the carriage grew thick with fear, and our suspicions of one another intensified. The darkness fed on our disintegrating trust, urging us to turn against each other. At first, we tried to resist its influence, huddling together in the dim light, reminding ourselves of our shared humanity. But the strain began to show. Emma lashed out at Tom, accusing him of never truly loving her. Sarah, tormented by her mother's death, fixated on Dave, her anger boiling over. Jane, overwhelmed by the guilt of the lives she couldn't save, retreated into herself, withdrawing from the others. And I felt my own demons clawing at the edges of my mind. The darkness reminded me of the reason I had been on that midnight train: a failed marriage, a lost job, and the overwhelming feeling that I was slipping into a bottomless abyss, much like the one that now surrounded us. As our unity crumbled, we began to see each other not as allies, but as enemies to be conquered. The darkness twisted our bonds, turning love into resentment and friendship into betrayal. We fought with increasing ferocity, the violent outbursts providing fuel for the abyss to further manipulate us, ensuring that our chances of survival grew ever slimmer. The breaking point came when it was revealed that Dave, a quiet and unassuming man in his 40s, was the drunk driver responsible for the accident that killed Sarah and Lily's mother years ago. He had fled the scene, never coming forward to face the consequences. The guilt of his actions had festered within him, poisoning his very soul. That revelation shattered any semblance of unity we had. The air in the carriage grew thick with tension as the full weight of Dave's crime bore down on us. Sarah's face twisted in rage as she lunged at him, her hands finding his throat. The others, their own demons gnawing at their sanity, chose sides in the escalating conflict. Tom, Emma, and I tried to break them apart, but it was useless. The darkness had driven them mad, and they fought with a ferocity born of raw fear and desperation. Blood began to stain the floor as the violence escalated. Sarah managed to grab a sharp piece of twisted metal from the warped interior of the carriage and drove it into Dave's stomach. His agonized screams echoed through the carriage, barely audible over the cacophony of metal and the wind rushing outside. Blood poured from his wound as he crumpled to the ground. Terrified and disgusted, I stumbled backward, distancing myself from the others. I watched in horror as Tom, overwhelmed by his own guilt, turned on Emma. She sobbed as she tried to fight him off, begging him to remember their love, but his face was contorted with madness. His hands gripped her neck tightly as she struggled for breath. I knew I had to do something, so I threw myself at Tom, desperately trying to pry his fingers from Emma's throat. But my strength was no match for the darkness that fueled him. Emma's face turned a sickening shade of blue before she went limp in Tom's grasp. He released her lifeless body, only to turn his mad gaze on me. I backed away, but the darkness had other plans. It closed in, swallowing both Tom and Emma's bodies whole, leaving me alone in the warped and twisted carriage. In the end, it was just me and the abyss. My heart raced as I stood alone in the contorted carriage, its twisted metal screeching in protest. The darkness whispered my name, coaxing me to step into the void. As the darkness whispered, visions of my own tragic past manifested before me. It showed me the times I'd hurt people I loved, the choices I'd made that led to the deaths of my friends, and all the selfish moments in my life. The abyss was trying to break me, to make me feel powerless and submit to its dark embrace. But I refused to give in. The whispers turned to screams, the visions became more vivid and relentless, but I wouldn't let it take me. I stumbled to the emergency door and wrenched it open. The suction of the darkness threatened to drag me into its clutches, but I held on, fueled by sheer desperation. The darkness lashed out in fury, tendrils of inky blackness snaking around my arms and legs, trying to pull me into its depths. It was as if the abyss had taken on a malevolent will of its own, hell-bent on devouring me. My muscles ached and my grip began to falter. I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer, but I refused to give up. With a final surge of determination, I reached out with my free hand and grabbed onto the carriage railing, anchoring myself against the darkness's relentless assault. In that moment, it was as if I had unlocked some hidden reservoir of strength within myself. The darkness began to waver, its tendrils loosening their grip on me. I fought back with all my might, pushing the darkness away. And then, suddenly, the darkness receded. The train burst back into the normal world, its speed slowing as it pulled into a station. I fell onto the platform, gasping for air, my body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. As I lay there, the station's lights flickering overhead, I knew that I had survived the abyss, but not without cost. I was the last one standing, but I was now forever haunted by the darkness and the lives that had been lost within its grasp.